A water emergency continues in Calgary at this hour. Wednesday night, there was a burst in a critical transmission line that moves water right across the city. Our crews continued to pump out water to identify the source of the leak. But here's what we know so far. That line is 2 meters wide in some parts, and its failure is limiting city supply. In fact, officials are urging residents to limit indoor water usage and to restrict outdoor watering. In the area of Bonus, people there are under a boil water advisory. It's critical infrastructure and it's an emergency right now as the city hosts a meeting where the central discussion will center around money for infrastructure. Big city mayors are in Calgary to meet with the Prime Minister in the next hour, and we caught up with two of them earlier today. Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek joins us from the city's Emergency Operations Center, and Halifax Mayor and Big City Mayors Caucus Chair Mike Savage joins us from the actual meeting site. Mayor Gondek and Mayor Savage, thank you both so much for taking the time, and welcome back to Power Play.
Thank you for having us.
Mayor Gondek, I'll start with you. This morning, the city's Director of Water Services said that there is a risk of running out of water in Calgary. How bad has it gotten it there?
Well, to put it into context for you, everyone is familiar with a water main break. This is not that. This is, in fact, the transmission line that goes from our water treatment facility to all of the reservoirs throughout our city. So when this transmission line or feeder main broke, it emptied a lot of water onto the streets of Boness. And so to turn off the valves to try to find out where the damage is and repair it means that there's a community that is on a boil water advisory right now. And Calgarians are being asked to restrict their water use so that until we get the water flowing through that pipe again, we can be as cautious as possible with our water supply.
Mayor Gondek, I think a lot of people are looking at this and understanding that, yeah, it is a critical pipe, but people are wondering how something like this could happen in a city like Calgary. What do you respond to them?
This is something that could happen in any city. Calgary has one of the best track records in the country for the least amount of breaks in our water lines. And for us to be going through this right now just means that every city is vulnerable because your infrastructure could have a breaking point, just like ours did. And we have done maintenance on this line. Our crews are always paying attention to looking out for things that might need to be fixed along the way. So even with a strong maintenance and inspection routine, this happened to us. It can happen anywhere.
This issue is the backdrop for a meeting when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who is there in Calgary, and the both of you are calling for more sustained funding from the federal government. So how would that help things like this, Mayor Savage?
Well, as our cities are growing, what's happening is that the revenue that's coming in from the growth is not evenly split or even close to that. And it means that cities are falling further behind. So we're calling for a municipal growth framework that simply ties the revenue that we have to the growth in the population. You know, when somebody moves into Calgary or Halifax, they start paying sales tax right away. They pay income tax right away. But 60% of the infrastructure in the country is under our control, but we collect 10% of the taxes. It's not a sensible model. It's a pre-Confederation model. That's what property tax is. So there's a lot of things that need to happen from an infrastructure point of view that isn't happening. So we're saying, let's just sit down, 3 orders of government, convene a meeting. Let's see if we can figure something out that more fairly reflects what's happening in the country. We all want growth, we all want housing, but there are costs associated with that.
Mayor Savage, that framework is asking for a significant increase in federal funding. In the last federal budget, the Canada Community Building Fund payments are indexed at 2% per year, and the feds say that it'll go from $2.4 billion in the last fiscal year to $2.6 billion in 2028-29. Why isn't that enough?
Well, because the growth of population is putting enormous strain on municipalities. You know, there was a study that was done that showed that the average municipal cost of infrastructure per unit of new housing in Canada is $107,000. You know, my first house didn't cost $107,000, and that's the cost in municipal infrastructure. So we're talking about models that are outdated for paying for those things. When people move to a new city or immigrants come, which I welcome wholeheartedly, they want water to come out of the taps. They want transit to run past their doors. They want green space for their kids to play. And these things all cost some money. We all want the growth. We should all be shouldering the responsibility for that growth, and the revenue should be shared more effectively. And we're not saying raise taxes. We're just saying let's share that model of revenue so that municipalities get their fair share as well.
I guess, Mayor Gondek, the question is, though, where to get that money from and without raising taxes. Part of the ask is also provincial and territorial governments to match federal funding. Do you think that they're willing to do that?
It's hard to say, but we'll never know until we get to the table together and have a conversation. And I would remind both orders of government that Calgary, as an example, is the economic engine of our nation. We generate a lot of business here. We pay a lot into income taxes, both federally and provincially, and we're simply not receiving our fair share back. So for all of the arguments of the Alberta government wanting their fair share in Confederation, frankly, municipalities are tired of not getting our fair share from the province or the feds.
Yeah, and Mayor Savage, to that point, though, and that you were making, there is still just one taxpayer, right, in every one of your cities, in both of your cities and cities right across this country. So how are we supposed to, as a taxpayer, sit there and say, that won't mean more money out of my pocket?
Well, we talk about this in Nova Scotia, that some people have said, look, you shouldn't be pointing fingers and arguing at each other over jurisdiction. There is only one taxpayer. There is. But on a per capita basis, the municipality gets the least share of the revenue. And yet we have so many of the infrastructure costs, as well as things that people kind of like and need, like fire protection in a wildfire season, like police protection, parks and recreation and libraries. And the model for funding those is outdated. It doesn't take into account the extraordinary growth of cities like Calgary and Halifax and many others across the country. So, there's only one taxpayer. What we're saying is let's fairly share the revenue that comes from that taxpayer.
Mayor Gondek, Danielle Smith's government in Alberta did recently pass legislation whereby deals between municipalities and the federal government have to get provincial approval. How do you think that will affect what the mayors are asking for here?
I think it's going to slow us down, and all we have to do is look to Quebec. Quebec has an arrangement with the federal government where any money that's flowing to municipalities must go through their provincial government first. And they have held up a lot of projects that cities are in desperate need to have completed. So I'm a little bit worried about what Alberta is doing. I also have to say, this feels a lot like our parents are fighting, and we're sitting there waiting for someone to give us an allowance to do all the tasks that they should be taking care of. So, to the point that Mayor Savage made, we are not getting our fair share back of the income taxes that we are paying in the first place. And a city like Calgary, we're welcoming about 260 people a day. And there has been very little change in the funding we get from the feds or the province.
Mayor Savage, are you worried that provinces will stand in the way of this and, further exacerbate the problem?
Well, we all have our interest here, and I don't expect anybody to just, stand aside when we ask for a more fair share and say, help yourself. But what we're saying is we need to talk about this. I've often said that property tax is the best system of taxation in the world, except for all the others, to paraphrase Winston Churchill. Property tax is a terrible way to tax people for services. And if we devised it from the beginning, we wouldn't do it that way. It's centuries old way of raising revenue. So what we're saying is I'm quite open to the conversation. If the provincial government in Nova Scotia wants to come and say, well, we dispute some of your arguments, great. But let's sit around a table and talk about it. So we'll be asking the Prime Minister today if he'd consider convening a meeting of federal, provincial, municipal leaders across the country. And let's not forget the important role of First Nations as well in communities and the infrastructure needs that they have. Let's talk about it. Let's sit down and we'll make our case, you make your case, and try to deal with it as adults in the room. Because right now it's not working, and we need a model that fixes that.
Halifax Mayor Mike Savage, Calgary Mayor Jyoti Gondek. Thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today. We appreciate it.